Hey everybody, welcome to the X Podcast, episode 23. Got my friends here with me today, Russ and Tim, and my bloody eye.
Oh my. He's trying to be like me.
I know.
Look at shit.
So if you're watching the YouTube, you know that my eye is bloodshot. I don't know what happened.
We're going to smoke it.
But we'll edit that out later. Today we have an interesting conversation. We thought we might as well just turn the mics on because the conversation's been a little heated already this morning.
You're kind of heated. That's pretty
heated.
funny.
I'm mad at you.
Why?
Anyway.
Why are you mad at me?
Let's tell our listeners what's happening. So we picked our topic on Monday kind of in response to an email a frequent listener of the show sent in. And it is this YouTube video of, how would you describe her? Maybe Christian watchdog?
That's how you would describe her. I don't know.
She might be self-described.
I have no idea. I've never watched her channel before. That was the first time I'd seen a full video from her.
I think Christian watchdog, basically, she talks about a lot of topics that have to do with the progressive church and all these things. Basically, this thing is scriptural, this thing's not scriptural, this thing's dangerous, this thing's satanic, this thing's anything. Not to say that everything she's ever said is bad or wrong. Anyway, she sends us this video, and
the woman in the video didn't send it to us. A listener sent a video. I just wanted to make sure said, "What do you think about this?" or something, right? Wasn't that?
What's your opinion on this?
What's your opinion on this?
Yes.
Pastor Steve sent this video.
Yeah.
Pastor Steve. He did not send this video. But sent us a video basically talking about the Enneagram.
That's so funny.
Basically talking about the Enneagram and how it has occultish roots and is a Trojan horse for the occult to enter into the progressive church.
That's intense.
Yeah,
it is intense. So the whole
and you love Enneagram.
I love Enneagram.
So this pushed your buttons anyways, because you are like he's like our resident Enneagram expert in all things
Once I started
Enneagram.
watching the video, I just threw my phone.
Enneagram cult. He is our resident expert.
Okay, and I think, speaking of the whole reference to the cult and what is a cult, we have many times been referenced to as a church, ex-church, as a cult. People will...
Many times? Is it many?
Many. Yeah, I think many. People will drive by.
A few times I've heard it.
People will drive by and see that we don't have a cross on our building, and they will call us a cult because of our signage.
Or it could be because the name of our church is X-Church. It sounds cultish. I've heard reference to that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I absolutely have. Like a guy was it a guy or there's somebody that told me, he said, "Yeah, I just did church. I wasn't going to come cuz I don't know, there's just something about like X."
Yeah.
And I was like,
something about the letter X.
Like, yeah, I was like, well, I think it's one of the 26 letters of the alphabet, but I don't know what's wrong with X. I guess we should have done
I'm going to spend a whole day where I judge humans by their names.
All right, so
Your
Daddy,
name's Brad. You're a cult.
Daddy, why don't you go first?
Yeah, Daddy.
Start talking about.
Can you guys bring out the Kool-Aid we have?
Yes, we have some Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Hey, Haley's Comet is coming.
Oh, I'm gonna get in so much trouble today.
You are.
So
You're
are we?
kind of-
Let's start with this. We'll talk about the Enneagram video in a second. I got plenty to say on that.
You do.
But let's start with the main burning question: is X-Church a cult?
No.
Prove it.
Prove it? Well, I don't know if there's a way we can prove it. I guess I would always say this whenever people kind of, and this is always, again, there's a lot of different definitions of cult out there, but when you look at it in regards to typically a religious environment, which seems that most cults, they kind of are associated with some type of religious belief system. I've always seen it as cults were either A, really hard to break into, or B, they're really hard to get out of.
Or both.
Or both. Yeah, I would say actually both. Because a lot of times you say, why are they hard to break into? It's typically because there are secrets within that organization or that cult that they do not want to get out.
Yeah.
So they make it hard to break into. There's these, like, there's a testing, there's all these things before you'd ever get accepted into it.
I don't know if that's always true. I would say that there's a lot of different cults in history that their goal is to get you to stumble into it.
Yeah.
And so
They'll entice you with things.
right.
Yeah,
so
but they still have secrets that are usually hidden within that
Right.
they don't want you to full exposure to
well,
that.
the
They'll
whole
invite
idea, and especially in religious settings, is the idea of heavenly deception. Okay, the idea of it's okay to lie to somebody because they can't fully understand it
Yeah,
yet
yep.
because they're spiritual babies. So
Yep.
in religious cult settings, it's like, oh, we're doing them a service. We actually love them for real, so
Yeah.
we're going to
Yeah.
lie to them up front to get them into
Right.
Yeah.
our cult. Anyway, go ahead.
Yep.
To me, because I know we want to go on to some feisty things. One of the
I like it.
best
I'm
markers.
feisty right now. We don't
Right
need to go
now.
anywhere.
So one of the best markers of a cult is control. I read an acronym I actually thought was really helpful by one expert on all things cult, and he used the acronym BITE. That any cult is usually going to have its behavior, information, and then the T is your time or something like that. But it talks about behavioral control. They're going to try to have.
Yeah.
They're going to try to control who you talk to, how much
Yep.
you sleep, what you do. The I is informational control. So to me, I actually, when I was thinking about this, I was like, a lot of people say that North Korea is the world's largest cult because they control what you hear, what you don't hear, and so you have this whole hermit kingdom that worships based on a false conception of reality. And then T is for thought. They try to control the way you think. So to me, one of the ways I was processing through this, the difference between a cult and a healthy church is a cult will try to control what you think for their own purposes. The gospel, a healthy church, will hopefully help transform the way you think for your good and for God's glory. And then the E is emotional control. They'll either manipulate your emotions, exploit your emotions, try to get you to minimize or block emotions. And so a healthy church is actually the antithesis of all of that.
Yeah.
In fact, I was thinking about this. I had lunch with one of the guys in the creative department. We're talking about just different church cultures. And just like any attribute of a human being or an organization or anything, any attribute we know has a great side and a shadow side. And so I just started kind of thinking about this morning about the thought of one of the things that we say all the time is we don't want culture here to happen by accident. Culture either happens by default or by design. So we want to have and I believe we have, by God's grace for the last few years, create a really strong, healthy culture. It is not by default.
Which the first four letters
Cult.
of the word culture.
It's
Sure, I
cult.
was gonna say it's the root of culture.
But
So we are a cult.
But
No?
a little trivia. Here's
Just
anybody know where culture comes from? The word. It's Latin from cultura, which literally means to cultivate the soil. So culture is just whatever you put in the soil. So
We
maybe
just
the
cult
difference
the soil.
between a healthy church and a cult is what are your culture. And so,
in the soil.
but the thought that came to my mind this morning is the danger of the double-edged sword of a strong culture is a really healthy strong culture.
Yeah.
When it empowers is amazing. An unhealthy strong culture when it controls is detrimental. A really strong culture when it includes is beautiful. A really strong culture when it's unhealthy and excludes intentionally is really damaging. When it empowers people, when it inspires people to live better, that's amazing. When it controls people by guilt and manipulation, that's appalling and it's damaging. And so I think one of the dangers is if you ever see a really captivating business, a really captivating organization, a really captivating church, they actually, by definition, will have strong characteristics that bring people into a greater story. And it's going to be a strong culture. And I think what happens a lot of times is, first off, anything that has humanity in it is already tainted because there's going to be weaknesses and mistakes. But even if it's a really healthy culture, if it's a strong culture and someone gets hurt by it, the easiest thing is to say, oh, well, that's a cult.
Yeah.
And to pinpoint moments of hurt.
I think
That's good.
We've definitely in culture cheapened the term cult.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that has been to culture, that's been to society's detriment.
Yeah.
Because everything that has a cult-like following, quote
Yeah.
unquote, becomes a cult.
Yeah.
So Chick-fil-A has a cult-like following. People just go crazy about Chick-fil-A. Why?
Yeah.
Because they have amazing service, they have an amazing culture, they have an amazing product, and people will wait in a line that wraps around the building 3 times.
Right.
Because, I mean, where else do you see where you have 4 teenagers walking around in vests trying to get your order at the same time?
Apple.
I mean, right, Apple.
Apple's a cult.
Cult-like following.
Yep.
That in modern day definition of the word cult, you have all of these different things that would apply. and you'll see people call really anything that they don't like or agree with a cult as well.
Yeah.
And so you just get in these really dangerous delineations and these dangerous characterizations of certain organizations, because when you speak about cults, there's a certain power that I think you have to do some research on. Like I did preparing for this conversation. But if you look at it, about the first 10% of interaction that you have with any organization, with any church, with any company, with any restaurant, anything worth doing, okay, you're gonna see a lot of parallels between a cult and an organization.
Yep.
Okay, you know why? Because they're trying to get you
Yeah.
into their business. They're trying to sell you a bill of goods, or trying to present a thought process, or trying to present a gospel, or trying to present, they want you to change your behavior in order to participate in their good or service or their community. That is the essence of the first 10% of a cult. And I feel like a lot of people, they'll look at that and they'll go, oh, you're trying to manipulate me.
Right.
And so you're therefore a cult.
Right.
But if you go into the next 90% of the cults of recent history, there's a lot more to it.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you guys want to go into the extra 90%.
I do. Before we do, I want to circle back on something you said and just put an exclamation point on it, which is you better be careful the words you choose to describe something.
Yeah.
Especially when you're upset about something, because words matter. And you'll laugh at this because we're talking about C.S. Lewis this morning. But I was thinking about this C.S. Lewis quote where he says, "Be very careful not to use words that are bigger than the subject, because then you'll eventually run out of words." So he said, don't use infinite when what you really mean is very. So when you throw a stone, whether out of good intentions or hurt, to label something a cult when it's not, two terrible things you've just committed. Number one, you have, if it's not true, maligned a person and a group. And I would especially, I'm not trying to be, especially if it's something that, if you're in a context of faith that God's behind, I would be really careful what you malign and accuse and label as a cult. Also because you'll confuse people that place could use to actually reach people. But the second thing you do is then you run out of the word to actually describe and warn when people need to be warned about what a cult really is.
Yes.
That's good.
And so that's really important.
That's good.
You don't want to go to the extra 90% of a cult?
The parts that make it, that's under the hood.
I think it'd be helpful for us to talk. I do want to talk about cults. I do want to talk about how you would find yourself in one. What are the characteristics of one?
You remember the show that Leah Remy did? She did kind of a documentary show on her experience in Scientology, I think it was.
Remember when
It was
Sean
pretty
from Boy Meets
fascinating.
World ended up in a cult?
Did he really?
Anybody? Remember
No.
Sean from Boy Meets World ended up in a cult, and at the end, I mean, when would this ever happen in a sitcom these days? He found God, and he cried alone, but he was just alone, and he ended
Really?
up in a cult.
No.
Yeah, there's no point in me telling that story. I just remember that.
I think the detrimental part that happens, I think when you say the initial 10% that, everybody experiences, that's why I think it is kind of confusing, especially in, I would say, Christian circles, or I'll just say religious circles, that sometimes it's, I think for just people looking on the outside, and that's why I talk about be careful of the label, is that it can be really hard initially on the front end to delineate, is that a cult or is that just a strong culture? You know what I mean? I think that's where it gets, like you said, it gets mislabeled on different places. I think, when it comes to, I don't know, you guys already kind of said that, but I just feel like there becomes usually patterns of separating. One thing you see is that in a cult typically is there is an encouragement to separate from family and friends that aren't there in it or don't believe in it.
Yeah.
So that to me is like a huge, that's a big warning sign when it's like, no, you don't need to talk to them. No, you need to stay with us all the time. We have our own group in here. And I would just, and then you jump off that. I would, and what I want to do is I would love to be able to mention some of these things and then just, what do we say in response to that as a church? We would say we don't want people to live solely in this really small community that is X Church. We want people to be in your own community. Right. We want you to go into the world. That's what Jesus said, and to take the gospel and go and speak and meet people and greet them and show God's love to them and do all these things. And I think that's one of those delineations on that point, which is isolate yourself from the world. Yeah. We would say go into the world.
There's actually a term for that isolation.
What's that?
I can't remember the guy's name, but it's called DFU. And it's called...
That's the name of the term with the guy?
DFU is the name of the term.
I've never heard that.
Acronym? What's the other word for acronym? Anyway,
or acrostic. One and two.
Tell me which one it is after I say it.
Okay.
It is distancing from your family of origin. DFU.
I can't remember exactly which one it is. One of those is the letters itself spell a word.
Okay.
Like when he said bite, and then each one is it.
That's an acronym.
That's an acronym. An acrostic, I think, is just a bunch of letters that may not actually spell a word.
So whichever one it is.
Whichever one it is. Are you sure you didn't get that wrong?
Send me an email.
I
Tell me.
I would never get anything wrong.
It's one of those things. DFU. What was it to say it again, though? We kind of...
DFU, the whole idea of distancing yourself from your family of origin.
Yeah.
And so the support system that you have, the whole idea of the next level of a cult would be, let's isolate you from those people.
Yeah.
To where we become your family,
yeah.
which is why cult leaders would, a lot of times, it's very common for a cult leader, you would call...
Family language.
Right, they use family language towards the leader of the cult. Brother.
Father,
grandpa, daddy,
brothers,
things like that. Like those are mother, very common in cult circles.
Yeah, and I think it's really...
And in the church, because you're my brother.
But
Brother Kevin.
But I'm not the leader, though.
Here's where I think it's really important when you're processing if being careful not to ever be duped into a cult.
Yeah.
But then on the backside, when you're accusing a place, here's where every attribute's tricky. Because every good thing in life every bit of gold has its fake gold.
Nuance.
And it's nuance. So like the healthy side of the whole daddy blah blah is honor, which is a healthy thing.
Right.
Control and manipulation and trying to isolate you from people is a super unhealthy thing.
Yeah.
So it's like looking at again, it's manipulating people for their emotions. That's an unhealthy thing. Inspiring people to take on the world and get a passion to serve humanity is a great thing. Yeah. I just think, but I think it really comes back to, I think one of the markers that I think you can just expound on forever is that whole idea of control.
Yeah.
The closer you get into an organization, if you notice that people are trying to control your life, like we talk about this, one of the things that we always say around here is you don't have to believe to belong.
Yeah.
And we want people to come into this place and have space for wherever they're at in life and have space for whatever beliefs that they're navigating in life. And so the closer you get into a cult, I think several things. You see them trying to control, again, the bites, your behavior, your information. Hey, don't read that. Don't look at that. Don't let us, or intentional deception of information. Or can withhold. There's a lack of transparency. Thought control. You can't think that. You have to believe exactly how we believe. You have to think exactly how we think. One of the things I love is theologically, even as a staff, we're a mutt.
Yeah.
You know, like that's kind of rare in some circles. I'm not saying it's bad to have some unity to be like-minded, but there's so much space.
Yeah. Especially
for a church, for us, there's the things that we hold with a closed hand and an open hand as far as what we stake our lives on. And then emotional control. And I think when you get deeper and deeper into the ugly core of cults, you'll see that manifest in leaders that will abuse, leaders that will take advantage of women, leaders that will shroud themselves in secrecy, leaders that will exploit, and leaders ultimately, the end result of however shiny the front door looks of a cult, the end result is destruction.
Yeah.
I mean, I even read a heartbreaking story this morning that came out of there's this prayer movement I've heard great things about before, but it's kind of so I won't name the prayer movement, but there's a prayer movement that can be kind of really deep and hyper spiritual in ways. And a guy that had some really deep past trauma, this goes back to, you can appear to be spiritually mature, but your soul emotionally is a mess, became charismatic. People started following him and having all these all-night prayer meetings, but he ended up using this to control this group of people, dictate in this old prayer school their chores, their daily routines, what they did, how much they should pray, how much they should listen to him, and then ended up starting to like ostracize and excommunicate people, convinced this girl to marry him, and then this girl found out 2 months later that her best friend, this girl that married him, commits suicide, is what the police said. come to find out, this guy had her murdered for not falling in line. Gruesome story that I'm telling for a podcast. But the point is, what started as a shiny door, the end result of any, come to find out when they sent in investigators, it was a cult. This guy had made, is kind of like a parachurch ministry, if you want to call it ministry, of the school. He had drawn people away from themselves. That's why we, even as a staff, one of the things that we're really big on to create healthy culture is that we don't allow little kingdoms to be built in and of itself. Like, we're all one team, we're all one church, we're all one. We have one vision, that's to change the world and to serve people and to get people on the path to God. But the end result of that core of getting in that culture was destruction to people. The end result of anything healthy will always help people, not hurt people.
I'll tell you another characteristic of these cults that I thought was interesting. I saw a video that kind of spoke to surviving members of a lot of different cults, and one common theme that ran throughout all of the interviews was the fact that the cult relied pretty heavily on exhaustion. And so let me exhaust you, and not just like, oh, I'm tired, more like you should feel guilty for the amount of sleep you're getting. Like a real guilt, because the understanding of, if I cut off the amount of time you sleep, I thwart your ability to think critically. And so if I can do that, and if I can exhaust you all day into the very late night, wake you up early in the morning, if I can exhaust you with tasks, then I can get you to own my thought process as your own. And so that's how they would manipulate people into going, I just don't have the energy to think. And so I'm going to just, whatever you say, I'm just going to believe, because I'm so tired. And I'm so exhausted.
And it's another marker that should give you a red flag. They don't care about your welfare.
Yeah.
If you're in an organization, they should care about what you're doing. They should also care about your welfare, your rest, and your well-being. They should actually want you to go on vacations.
Yeah, that's
Which
good.
is
Weird, because this place gives us vacation time. So how could this be a cult when we get vacation?
I just want to say this. I know this is not the point of this podcast, but and I don't ever want to amplify the dissenters, and I don't want to throw stones at people that say things out of hurt. But I do want to say this. I want to go on record as someone who's lived in a few states and worked at a few different churches, that anytime you get close enough to an organization and look under the hood, there's always things under the hood, especially with humanity. But I just want to go on record and say this is one of, if not the healthiest place I have ever been. That the closer I've gotten to the core of especially what we've become, not just what we are, and your leadership, the more impressed I've been with its character and with its integrity and with its health. And I know that's not the point of this podcast, but I just want to say that. I just want to make that statement, that this is not a perfect place, because no place is, but this is a really healthy place.
I think it's interesting, too. One thing that people, I think, get confused about what would make an organization a cult or not is I think you mentioned it earlier, in a cult, you are not allowed to leave. You aren't. You're shunned.
They'll do their best to keep you from leaving.
And if you talk about leaving, it's thwarted. And then I think we might be an odd church as far as that goes, but if you want to leave, we're kind of like, all right, well, tell us why you want to leave, and let's have a conversation so we can grow, and we'll bless you on your way. And even if you want to come back, you can come back. You can leave again.
That's what I mean. Usually you don't have an open door like that if it's a cult. That's what's so funny.
I had employees, what was about a year and a half ago, that told me they were going to leave and were so nervous, but it was one of the joys of my life to say, hey, I'm sad for you, but I want to celebrate with you on your next journey and still have a friendship. And that should be a healthy, that should be the mark of any healthy church.
Yeah, I agree.
No, it's interesting. Let's get into this Enneagram conversation, because I'm chomping at the bit. So we'd all agree that we're not a cult. At least
I would say we're not a cult,
but we'll put a poll
based
out there.
based on those definitions.
We'll put a poll on Facebook or something to see what the public thinks. Lydia, do you think we're a cult? The person producing this
and if you
podcast,
think
just
so,
tell
you're
me
gone,
later.
and we're never going to let you talk to your family.
Yes. It's Daddy speaking. No, I'm totally kidding. Totally kidding. I'm going to get in so much trouble today. Okay, so this video about the Enneagram, I think it kind of ties, maybe this could be the part of our conversation that's part 2 to our yoga podcast. So if you haven't seen our yoga podcast, we talked about whether or not that exercise technique was demonic. And so it's quite a doozy, so make sure you go back and look. But
This does kind of feel like a follow-up.
Yes,
There's
we've
some
done
similarities.
and maybe even a follow-up on the Enneagram podcast we did, which I believe is our second episode.
Was it?
So we did a whole episode.
We did one early, and people loved it.
We did a whole episode talking about the Enneagram and its usefulness in our lives and how it's helped us grow spiritually and with our self-awareness.
But now we know we're demonic.
Can we go relabel it
Basically.
to the Trojan horse episode?
We have, there is this video somebody sent us basically saying that its roots are founded in occultish practice and demonic.
From what, early 1900s
Right,
originally?
It was literally created by demonic spirits. The
Yeah,
story-
automatic writing.
Automatic writing. So the summoning of a spirit.
Oh, I
to
see. I didn't
take
get that
over-
far.
Yeah,
to take
that's
over
where-
someone's hand to draw a diagram. And,
Or write stuff, yeah.
Or to write stuff. And out of the end of it, there was a diagram. And
It looked a lot like a pentagram, but it had 9 points. Saying.
And so that is the supposed origin of the Enneagram. I'm not trying to make light of things that I'm not trying to make light
that
of
stuff's
things
real.
that are demonic.
I
I am
believe that's
somebody.
real.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before on this show. The whole idea of that there is a spiritual world.
Yeah.
That there's a spiritual context, and there are spirits that that do have an impression on the world today. What do you guys think about the Enneagram? Is it demonic? And how do we process when people tell us that these things are demonic?
I'll just say my initial response to the Enneagram was really probably The Road Back to You by Ian Cron. When I think
Your
you
initial
were talking about it for a
exposure.
while, and then I think you were like, "Here, read this book." Or I can't remember. Did we get him for the whole? We got him for a
Well,
bunch of the
just
staff?
for the record, when I started talking about the Enneagram, everybody yelled at me and
Said that you were a heretic.
and told me that I was, except for you.
Except me, I wasn't here. I was
weren't here.
already. Me and you were already on that. In
God-
2016.
God sent you here.
know.
Yeah, you guys were
Yeah.
right around.
God
that.
sent you to this cult.
Is that what it is? I would say the
When did you read it?
That was a couple years ago. What year did you arrive?
2018.
I read it 2017. I got here September 2018.
So right previous to you coming on staff, I was first exposed
Exposed
to it. Yeah.
And
you're usually a late adopter. of
yes, a
things.
late adopter. And so I read the book.
Joggers.
There was nothing jogging.
Skinny jeans. Late adopter.
Keto.
No, I got rid of the joggers.
You know
They
what?
were-
You got me into keto. I give you that.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm
Is it
glad.
working?
It's working.
Good.
I'm about to have to keto here in a second. We're gonna wrap up this conversation. Wish I was joking.
Do you have to pee? Is that what you're saying? Okay, let's drag this out. So, yeah, I think when I first read the book, I would say my initial reaction was not, I did not have any red flags. That this was like some type of cultish thing coming in. Again, maybe the way it was written, it wasn't written to kind of say any of that stuff. I will say it wasn't. And I looked at it like it was, hey, here is a tool that can maybe help you understand. One of the things I actually like about the Enneagram over other type tools was that this was one of the first tools that I felt like ever talked about a negative side to a personality type. Whereas Myers-Briggs and all the other ones, I felt like they were almost used in a way to say, here's an excuse for, well, I'm just like that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I actually found kind of refreshing when I first read it was, here's a tool that actually said, this is what it looks like if you identify with a type. And I do agree that you can find a little bit of yourself in a lot of different types, but there's one that you're predominantly, that you probably kind of feel like you are more like. That there are some negative things that you could find that you go toward when you're not healthy. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was pretty helpful to kind of be on the watch for, hey, am I doing this from the right motive or not? So much speaks to motive of the heart, which, again, scripturally, Jesus speaks to the motive of the heart. And so there's a lot of connections I felt like that could be made in that regard. So when I first read that book and I did not have like any like major red flags on that. Again, Enneagram is like one of those things, I think they say on the video, where there's not any like objective like source or whatever. So there's a little bit of it, all the names are different, the types categories are all different.
Yeah.
So you kind of don't have any one objective source saying this is the gospel of Enneagram.
Russ, is it like astronomy?
Astronomy or astrology?
Astrology.
Yeah.
No, it is not.
Astronomy is an acronym.
It's an acrostic.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, all
That's funny.
the benefits of Enneagram we discussed in that episode. So go binge on Enneagram episode and yoga episode. But to answer the question, I think what you said at the end, several things. One, well, I did not get far enough in that video they sent to hear about the demonic activity handwritten. Everything.
That was about the 3-minute in the video.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
No, I got halfway through.
Just kidding.
Now I'm gonna keto something. What you said at the end is the thing. Everything I've researched shows that the origins are still disputed. So, a lot of people say this was part of the Sufi culture for a while. It's part of the Greeks, early esoteric Christianity. There's so many things. And then the thing that we have mapped is from the 21st century, how it's spread through Gurdjieff or whatever, the Russian mystic, and then down to Richard Rohr, then Susan Stabile, Ian Cron, and all of that. And so, I think first off, everything I've seen, we still are not sure how this started. So I don't think there's any expert that knows exactly how it started. So in that instance, when it comes to origins, I would go back to the arguments that we navigated through in the yoga episode about, yes, it's important to look at it. It's more important, if you're not sure the origins, how are you leveraging it or redeeming it for your good in a responsible way? And then the other side of me, we really espouse through this episode the notion of being open-minded. And so part of me, we talked about the woman that shares this has to me the appearance of kind of watchdog Christianity, which I really do have a horrible disdain for when the YouTubers that spend all their time just throwing stones at people. The flip side of me always wants to be open-minded to. I would not put her in the prophetic category. I would put that more in the watchdog category. Yeah. But, we were talking about this. I was telling you, one of the things I've tried to challenge myself recently, there are certain voices in Christianity that are that people tend to get really annoyed at. I'll name one. I won't name the other ones. But I actually really respect Francis Chan. But Francis Chan as he progresses, has some pretty extreme views of the church and how things go, and some people like them, don't like them. But one of the things I've tried to challenge myself to do.
What do you mean progressive? Because I think people would take that, I think people would take that a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
When you talk about Francis Chan being progressive, what do you mean?
Did I say he was progressive?
No,
I meant more he's against.
He's saying the church is becoming progressive.
He's against progressive Christianity. Yeah, my bad.
I feel like we may need to come back and do a full episode on progressive Christianity because I think that word gets thrown around a lot, and it's what are we talking about?
Let me say it this way: a lot of even though people way over stereotype megachurch and modern church, a lot of the movement of Western Christianity he has critiques for, and a lot of people do. The point I was going to make was one of the things I've tried, even though I disagree with a lot of the people that can fall into this camp and just at times be over critiquing and just extreme. One of the things I've tried to over the last year recalibrate myself to is being open to prophetic voices. Let's just be honest. Old Testament, New Testament, prophets are always annoying. They're always viewed to be extreme, a bit odd, corrective, intrusive, annoying. That's why they were killed, But a healthy individual and a healthy bride of Christ, needs, with this faith context I'm talking now, needs the teachers, the apostles, the evangelists, the pastors, and the prophets. Without all 5 of those functioning, there's not health. So one of the things that I try to do in these moments is say, okay, I don't like the whole thing of the Trojan horse bringing, to me, that's dramatic. Yeah. I don't agree with that. To me, I know that I feel like I've been able to leverage the Enneagram for good in my life. The other side of me, again, not putting her in the prophetic camp, I put her more in the watchdog camp, wants to say, okay, if there's a prophetic tint of anything that's trying to bring correction that I need to hear, let me not be so turned off by the messenger that I don't hear any ring of truth in the message. Yeah. So is there any ring of truth in the message that I can hear? And the only thing that is, as I know we're talking, as I sift through this is, again, everything has a double-edged sword. It's got its good side and its shadow side. Enneagram, to me, has been a beautiful, life-changing tool of discipleship and soul discovery in my life. If it has a shadow side, okay, let's talk about it. A shadow side could be, if we're not careful, what is it she calls it? A Gnostic road to the self. Yeah. It can create, if I'm not careful, a preoccupation with self.
Yeah.
It can create a bit of narcissism. If I'm not careful, I know we were talking about perennialism. So fancy word for, and I don't like their definition in this video of perennialism.
Yeah.
She defines perennialism as using all world religions. The actual, like Webster definition of perennialism is just being able to use ancient philosophies well for any portion of life. So in that instance, I think if it's on a spectrum, perennialism, I think there's a mild, responsible way that can say, hey, I'll eat the fish and spit out the bones anyway. Right. Just like the Bereans, I'll learn from anything.
Which the definition of the video was perennialism is the essence of all, the essential makeup of all religions are the same.
Right.
Yes.
Which that flirts with, or that actual definition is almost, that's married to universalism, relativism.
Correct.
And that is dangerous. And I thought, when I was listening to some of that, I thought, I think it's in a church faith context too. I think one of the things that's worth noting is there's difference between somebody who has a robust understanding and foundation of Scripture, eating the fish, spitting out the bones, and I guess maybe a good caution for the church is there might be people who don't have basic understandings of the tenets of Christianity.
Right.
Could they be swept up in the things that maybe a pastor, a well-seasoned pastor in Scripture could be encouraged by? Could they be confused by?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I think I could blow it up into a much larger issue than I think it actually is. Quick note on Enneagram before I do that. I would have a lot more concern with the Enneagram if it made me feel euphoric about who I was essentially in my first interaction with it. But my journey with it, and I have gone, it has been a year of me digging in deep to it and really trying to have arguments with myself whether or not this is something that is transformational for me in a way that brings me closer to Jesus in a way that isn't self-glorifying. Yeah. And my journey has been of this. I'd be interested to hear if you guys would agree. There's an initial, that's me. That's language for all the things that I've felt. And then not far after that, there's a massive nosedive, tailspin into all of the pain.
Oh, that's me.
Right. Oh, that's me. Here's all of the shadow things about myself that I have never been aware of before that I now see. And so for me, it was not a pleasant experience, which is actually sometimes a great indication for me that it might be good work for for my soul, is to go, no, let's go deeper. Oh, there's pain there. I need to go deeper into that pain.
It's not flattering.
Oh, it's not. It's not. I'd say if your exposure to the Enneagram is artistic posts on Instagram, then I would say that you might want to be worried about your relationship to the tool.
Right.
That's a worrisome relationship because it's shallow.
Superficial,
But if you want, even the writer of that book, Row Back to You, Ian Cron, he's like, the Enneagram is for one purpose only. It's for deep and profound spiritual growth. Yeah. And if you don't want to experience that, then I don't know if I would engage in the tool, is what he says. Yeah. And I would agree with that. I'd say that it hasn't been a pleasant journey. Not long after my exposure to the Enneagram was the start of a season of depression. And why was that? Because I was tapping into grief that I didn't have language for and didn't have words for. Right. And if I stayed there for a prolonged amount of time, I might go, ooh, that's a bad thing. But here's the thing, because I'm using it to enhance my relationship with God, God has used that language to show me how he can redeem my story and my past. Yeah. And so I think there's a huge benefit to it, and have huge, I don't know, I take huge issue with people who would instill fear around something that we can't completely understand. Yeah. Okay. The whole idea of, it's a Trojan horse and it is going to be that demonic spirit that subtly enters the church because it's popular. And we're going to say in progressive churches, here's the Trojan. Okay, well, let's unpack that statement. Yeah. people would call our church a progressive church.
Yeah.
If you look into our teaching, we are not quote unquote progressive at all. You can't politicize the church, right? You can't say that's a conservative church, that's a progressive church, because really when people say that, what you're doing is you are eliciting a political motivation out of it. Oh, that church would lean more Democrat. That church would lean more Republican. That church doesn't really care about the sanctity of marriage. That church isn't really passionate about the unborn. That church is more passionate about the demographics that it draws. That church isn't. I mean, when you are saying conservative church, progressive church, you are eliciting that response, even if you mean they adhere to the Bible or they're just looser with their interpretation of Scripture.
Or they just look at it and go, that's a big church, and they have lights and some big worship sound, and so they go, they're a progressive church, and it's like theologically.
Because they're a mega church. Which if you hate mega church, you're going to hate heaven.
That's what I'm right. But, so a church is progressive because it serves coffee.
Right.
A church is progressive because they because they have a drum set.
Usually the ones that aren't progressive serve more than coffee.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Where are we on the pour over set conversation for Sunday?
My point being,
why are you looking at me? I don't care. You get one then.
Okay, fine.
I've used the term progressive church probably too loose in my experience as well. But I would have caution if you hear people talk about progressive church too much and conservative church.
Yeah.
Is because there is no political leaning in church.
No.
Well,
I would say there shouldn't be, but I'm not going to
there
say
is
there is.
political leaning.
There
I'm just
is
saying political
we're not
leaning
here
in
for
church.
We're not
is
here
red
for
flag.
politics.
We're not here for politics.
That's what we're trying to say.
It's going to be really hard to associate yourself wholeheartedly with the cause of Christ.
Yeah.
And to have both of your feet in any one.
I agree.
Political party.
In fact, I agree.
People would not.
We don't
agree
want to
with
go political, but I totally feel like it's really hard to identify with either because of the closer I get to becoming like Christ, the harder I can find my community or identity politically on either side.
Oh yeah.
But I can't. Like I'm finding myself. That's why I have a hard time identifying with a party.
Same. And in America right now, it's a hard place to be to not belong to a party. But let me tell you, if you're listening, and there's generations coming up that are partyless.
Yep.
Yeah.
They are partyless. That is not going to be. It might be a thing because it's entrenched in our history as a country, but it is going to be less and less of a. There's going to be less and less of a separation, a line drawn in the sand, whether you listen to that or listen to that. And I say all that because of this. When I was listening to this girl talk, she speaks well. And
Which girl?
The girl who started this.
Are you talking about the New Age lady?
No,
you're talking about
the
host.
The
The
host.
host. Okay.
The watchdog girl.
Alyssa Childress.
I don't think that her intentions are even bad. I think that in the let's say in the iPhone culture in 2021, where we have so much information coming our way, we can't agree on who has authority over truth in our lives.
Yep.
And we get into real messes, relational messes. We get real confused and really fearful when we just hand out who is the authority of my truth. And so people like this girl, what they become is, hey, I've done the research, okay? I have on my panel, this is what she did to start this video. I've done the research. I have on my panel the expert of the origins of all things mysticism. What is she doing? She's making an argument of authority, saying, I am the one to be trusted, when she could not have possibly laid out why in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me take this to a political context. Here's why it's important. You make Fox News or CNN your authority of truth, you are going to have a really hard time having a relationship with somebody whose authority of truth is Fox News because you have different truths.
Yeah.
And here's what should set us apart as Christians. Our authority of truth, right, is derived from one source. Yeah. And so I don't have a problem with watchdogs. I have a problem that they don't as well advise people not to take them as their authority of truth. Because for me, they're insulting their listeners' intelligence.
Yeah.
Because instead of saying, hey, we had this big conversation. This person has a real problem with Richard Rohr. Okay, Richard Rohr is this kind of, what would you say, ostracized theologian, Franciscan friar.
He's a Franciscan.
Liberal spiritual sage.
Yeah.
Progressive.
This,
Technically,
very
putting that label.
controversial as far as his theology as of late, but very influential religious figure as well. And
We love one of his books.
right, and I've read a lot of his stuff. Pastor Jim's not read any of his things.
Keep myself pure. I'm just kidding. I just haven't.
But the whole idea of she did another video articulating why his teachings, how did she
Or
put
false
it?
teaching. Or I would.
Outlining why he is a false teacher. So I guess I don't have a problem with her producing that video. Okay. I have a problem with people feeling like you should instill fear in other Christians to even engage in people who think differently. Okay? What if instead of saying, I can prove to you that Richard Rohr thinks that that Jesus wasn't divine, or whatever, however she put it, and then she reads 2 or 3 sentences from his book. I have issue with that because you can't derive someone's theology from 2 or 3 sentences from a book. Go read the book. Go read the book and encourage your listeners to go read the book. And then give me a longer understanding of why you do or don't disagree. My problem with the iPhone culture, and let me get back to that, is that we have such little patience and such little motivation to engage further and to put more effort in digging into truth because of the time it's going to take, because we don't know who to believe. But my opinion,
That's a big one. I think people don't know who to believe.
you don't know who to believe.
That's-
And so you just, I'll just take her
I
word
would
for
say
it.
this.
She's done the research.
Let me just
It's
say this.
easier.
I think.
What's your devil's advocate?
Well, no. I would say this to speak to that. I think a great point to step off of that. When you say I don't know who to believe, I don't have any fear when I read someone. So we're talking about like the Enneagram and all that. But I don't, because I know what I believe. And I think if you are confident in knowing what you believe, so when it comes to theological things or like that, I would not be afraid to read Richard Rohr books or any of that stuff and go, I'm going to be deceived. I would not have that fear. And I think when you go, I think the big question is today, and I could read it and go, I don't agree with that. I do agree with that. And I do think that a lot of times we just put people in a camp. If there's one part of their thinking or their theology that doesn't match ours, I feel like it's been too easy, kind of like we talked about the word cult. It's too easy to throw out the word heresy.
Right.
It's too easy to put them in a camp that they're you know what I mean, off the wall, they're this, they're crazy. And we do that. It happens in church circles, denominations do it. If you're not my denomination, then you guys are weird and you have crazy rules and you do this. And so I feel like we do that just way too easily. I think a lot of this, if anything, should hopefully be motivation to say, I think it's important for us to know what we believe. If you know what you believe, then I don't feel like you have to live in the fear that if I'm doing yoga because someone invited me to a yoga class and they did all these different stretches and muscle poses, and my gosh, I was sweating like crazy, and all this, that am I somehow going to be demonically possessed? Am I going to, you know what I mean? I don't feel like you have to do that. So I think, to me, a great base to start with is to know what you believe. To know what you believe about Jesus and to know what you believe about those certain things. I think that is what undergirds. So then you can take things from someone, because there's so many different people. When we talk about the church and talk about church leaders, it runs the spectrum across the church leaders of well, I don't agree with that, and I do agree with this, and I don't agree with that. And so I just think that you can take more of a posture of, I'm going to eat the fish, spit out the bones when it comes to it. And I think you could do that with the Enneagram. Is you could take, I'm going to take here's where it's helpful. My only, I would say not caution about the Enneagram, but my only caveat, which I think we already said, is if it becomes something where you do become focused on self rather than on surrendering to Christ. I feel like that's a big difference, because I do think sometimes what's attached to New Age philosophies is this idea that it is about self-actualization. It is about I'm going to figure out how to become the better self of myself. And I think to me that's antithetical to the gospel, which is I will never be a good enough self by myself because of my sin. And so the only way I do it is through the grace of Jesus and by surrendering to him in the gospel. And so I think if you become obsessed with self in the wrong direction, I think that, like you said, that's the trap of.
I think it's important. Enneagram's not gospel.
Exactly.
The Enneagram is not the gospel. It is a tool to help understand your existence in the world and how you can follow God in a more self-aware way. Because whether you're a Christian or not, you have seen the effects of somebody who's not aware of how they're coming across an unaware individual. Unaware individuals inflict damage on their environment. And I don't want to inflict damage on my environment because I'm not aware of when I'm drifting from health to unhealth. And for me,
emotional maturity. That's what we're talking about.
It's a maturing
EQ.
thing. And I don't think, here's the thing about the Enneagram, and people might not even care about this, but my point is this: you learning more about what quote unquote number you're dominant in is not you learning how to glorify yourself in it. It's understanding what your inherent brokenness has led you towards. Because I'm broken at my core, and because I'm not, like, I need God, like I need salvation, I need a Savior, because that is who I am at my core. And without him, I have tried to survive in the world dominantly this one way. And so for me, it's been one of the most helpful, eye-opening, and actually painful things to take those steps back and to have hard conversations with God, who's been all in my journey, all intertwined, to take a couple steps back and go, God, what's the source of that behavior I don't like and I don't want to do again? I know that behavior is coming out of me sideways and passive aggressively. How do I
I've seen that, I think, that in you too, which is cool. I've seen it is personal growth that has happened through that tool. And so we look at it and go, there's been such positive things. I think the goal is, as you would probably say, the goal isn't to become the ideal 8. The goal is to become more like Jesus, right?
My goal is that nobody would be able to tell me what number I am.
There you go. Then you need to be a 9.
The goal is integration. The goal is
that'd be good.
The whole concept of that.
To not label me based on those
every
stereotypes.
number highlights a characteristic of who God is, okay? And I want to become more and more like Christ every single day. And so inherently there are some good things about my number that resemble who Jesus was, okay? But there's also 8 other numbers that I need to lean more on and to become more empathetic and compassionate towards, and to assume and not just project who I am on other people, but to go, no, like, we are very different. Our numbers are different. I'm an 8 dominant, you guys are 3s. Okay, you guys are even different from each other. But like I've learned from you guys, let me just outline one difference because I think it's helpful. You guys are more performance oriented, okay? You have a healthy, I would say, I take this the right way. You guys do care about how people receive your messages. I honestly, if I'm unintentional, I do not really care about the way people hear me at all. I don't care if my boss thinks I did a good job. I just want to do the job really well, and I want it to be fully, like, I want it to be done the best way, and I don't really care who thinks it's good or bad. Anybody who's anybody knows that that's failed logic. Is that
you should hope your boss thinks you did it well.
Exactly.
That's an
illusion of control.
Not you think it's right.
But it's the shadow of that is an illusion of control that I think I have over my environment when I really don't. When you
that my way is the right way.
It's not always fake to present something. It's actually compassion, and that you by caring about the way something comes across, it's compassionate to the people who are listening to you. There's a healthy characteristic of an 8, and to have a full expression of self, and to have a boldness and a willingness to say what needs to be said, and to challenge status quos, and to make sure that everybody's performing as high as they can. But that is only amplified by a desire to present it in a way where people can lovingly hear it, and you can win them over and help bridge them to your argument. So that's an example of how I'm, maybe a little bit better than you guys, but not like, but not inherently.
Yes.
Obviously kidding, but the whole idea is we're very different, but we have to learn from each other if we want to grow and mature emotionally.
Yeah. I just say just yes a million times to everything you guys both said. I mean, you always do, but I think you have really beautifully laid out the power of Enneagram and how to leverage it for whatever the origins are. Again, going back to the St. Augustine, early Christian, to know yourself, to know God, you have to know yourself. And the two are inextricably linked. And if that's part of your processing, then it's actually a really powerful tool of discipleship to show your brokenness and where God's grace can come in the mix. And not only that, to be a tool of empathy to better love and serve the people around you. That's only a win-win. And so I just think what you said as far as the shadow side, there's a shadow side to anything. I think one of the things that you got at, that you were talking about as far as, because you know what you believe. Because for me, I do feel free to learn from anything. I do feel that Berean liberty that I'm going to get to heaven and realize I'm an idiot. All the things I think I'm so sure of theologically. But I feel like I have a healthy enough foundation in what I believe. I've rooted the truths of life and in Scripture that I feel a freedom to learn from anywhere. And so the part of me that's trying to have sympathy for those kind of videos is like, that wants to give the benefit of the doubt is maybe in my hopefully gracious opinion, an unwinsome way, she is trying to, I suppose, protect someone that doesn't know what they believe, that could maybe be swayed by certain teachers that she feels like could lead them astray. I don't know. But for me, the only shadow side, to double back on the Enneagram, potentially would be a preoccupation with self. And then that thought of, even more important than knowing the character of Russ is to know the character of God. Yes. And what you said about knowing what you believe, because while it's important to warn people against whatever you view deception to be or deceptive teachers to be, at the end of the day, let's say the Enneagram is deceptive. I don't think it is. To me, it's a beautiful tool. But let's say it is. If the enemy, if you're in a faith context, were to not to use the Enneagram, he'd just be using something else.
Right.
Yeah. So the key at the end of the day is not to look for the demon behind every bush, but to root yourself and immerse yourself so rock solid as much as you can into what you believe is the revealed Scripture, revealed truth of God in your life, to where you have the filter to start with through which you view everything else. To where you can take the Enneagram, where you can take anything in life and say, how am I going to use this to further who I'm becoming in Jesus?
Yeah, I totally agree. And we got to close up here soon, but the larger conversation that I think we need to have more conversations about, because it's rampant in our culture, is this this spirit of fear that we're sparking in each other as believers.
Yeah. Sometimes looks like clickbait on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's how do you get people to click on it and
you should be fearful.
Right.
Like you said,
Sure.
there's a demon behind every bush. And that I did a teaching on this, but that's why it's fresh in my head. But the whole idea of fear is a God-given emotion. Okay? And so fear is not always bad when you feel it. It's this constant spirit of fear bubbling up in your perception of life, the world, and God that will cripple you, and I think is a much more prevalent scheme of the enemy than a tool like the Enneagram is, and an exercise like yoga is.
Right.
Is you hunkering down, and this is hyperbole, hunkering down in your basement, buying canned foods on Amazon because the rapture's coming tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
why do you need canned foods if the rapture's coming?
That's a great question.
You don't need any food if the rapture's coming.
Not the rapture.
Well,
You're
for the
thinking the end of the
preppers.
world, the
Apocalypse.
preppers,
For
apocalypse.
dystopian futures.
The zombie apocalypse.
Acronym? Anyway, the whole concept of if your life is ridden by fear and you are just going from YouTube figure to podcast person to I had a political conversation with someone close to me where they're like, this person told me this was going to happen. This was right after all the Capitol riots. And they're telling me that January 9th is going to be the next wave, and it's going to be the surge, it's going to be the siege. And this person sent this person is close to me, Facebook video after Facebook video after Facebook video. So I saw this string of 6 QAnon stuff.
You got to get off of Facebook.
And so I watched these videos, and I'm like, you understand that guy said, I don't even remember. Like there was this one video. It was this
said all this stuff's going to happen, and it didn't.
Were you talking about February 9th?
No, January. No, this was right after the Capitol riots on January 6th. Right,
okay.
January.
Yeah, January 6th.
Anyway, it was literally one of those videos. It was this guy taking a selfie video. He's probably 70 years old. I heard from a military letter that it's going down January 9th. It's happening. So get prepared. I'm just saying, and I'm not trying to make fun of all this stuff. I'm just trying to say that fear will make you believe things.
Yeah.
It will make you believe things are happening that aren't actually happening.
Yeah. I've gotten a sense of what's interesting, even through this political process, through people and just family or acquaintances or friends or whatever, that there is an underlying fear in many parts of the church today. The direction the world's going, the direction politics are going, the direction the church is going. Like I get sometimes a barrage of stuff about the end is near. You know what I mean? Type of sense. And it's like, okay, I don't know, why are we living so afraid of
when
what's going
When you're Googling more of end times things than you are digging into your scripture, and when you're spending more time on YouTube and Facebook than you are like in a devotional life or like
worshiping God.
Right, than helping people, then I think that you might have a fear thing going on inside.
That might be worse than using Enneagram.
So this is just really simple. But in my mind, the default language of a believer in Jesus is faith, not fear.
Yeah.
And if your tongue is the lever to your heart, what are you full of? Because it is one thing to be cautious. It's in places you should be cautious. It's one thing to have wisdom and discernment. I mean, be open-minded, but also don't be I love G.K. Chesterton said, be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out.
Right.
Like, don't be gullible. Don't be caught up in every wind of doctrine. Don't be caught up like Paul to warn Timothy and godless myths and winds of craziness. Yeah, don't be like those people. But when power's inside of you and you belong to Jesus, if you are a person of faith and you're called more than a conqueror, you're an overcomer, and you know the kind of future and inheritance coming to you, and you know the kind of power and faith and authority that's been put on you, how in the world can you have a dystopian, fearful, world is going to hell in a handbasket kind of mentality where you are, maybe a fascinating conversation practically on this is the whole world of preppers. It's this whole thought of self-preservation. To me, a spirit of self-preservation is completely antithetical to the gospel. Yeah. It's a go and tell, not a flee and hide mindset.
Yeah. I remember at one point someone had told me that one of the things that they had wanted and desired out of a church life was that they were like, it literally sounded like a compound. I mean, these are people that I know really well, but it was like, man, we just want this close-knit, tight community where, we can do life together. But it was almost like and cut ourselves off from the outside world. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. That does not seem to line up with what Jesus sent us to do. Go into all the world. You know what I mean? You'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and to Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Like, I don't understand that mindset that I want to close off. And to me, that's where I would say, I think we're different than a cult. The doors are open, but we want to send people out.
Let me say one last thing on the cult. Send you out. I know we gotta end, but one of the things I love about you that distinguishes a cult, there is no room for dissent or differing opinions. And one of the things I love about you,
I was just dissenting with them before we started.
We have
a fist fight.
You not only allow it, you welcome it.
You wouldn't do that.
You make sure there's voices at the table that respectfully disagree. And that we sharpen each other through it. Yeah. That is not a mark of a cult.
No, I don't think we're a cult. I don't know if we have officially.
He looked hesitant.
Can we officially say that with this podcast, in the close of this, that we can officially put to bed that we're not a cult? Or I don't think we get to
I don't
say
even
that.
like you giving that much oxygen.
Okay, sorry.
I don't think there's that many people that actually
No.
Can I say, I want to say one last thing on fear because I want to. And
He wants to do a podcast on fear.
there's a whole, I think we probably should have brought this up earlier in the podcast because we got to wrap up now. But there's two major crises going on right now in our country, politically, that are all over the news. We have the border crisis that is going on where we don't have enough room to what is the word, detain all of the migrants that are coming up from the southern border. They're actually building a couple more, I heard. And I'll tell you what this has to do with our conversation. And then there's also a couple mass shootings that happened recently. The one in Boulder, Colorado, which doesn't seem to be motivated by anything other than mental illness and just a horrendous situation. But then there was the one in Atlanta.
Yeah,
where,
it seemed to be.
Right, where, what was it, a massage
parlor? Several.
Right?
I think it was like several massage parlors.
But there were 6 Asian Americans killed and gunned down because they were Asian.
Yeah.
And I think that, and this might be too political to end on, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it's despicable, is that we have this undercurrent in our country right now, and I don't like the fact that it's getting into the church, of we hate people because of where they come from.
Yeah.
And because of what's inherent about them. And I think that, unfortunately, and we think that we'd be beyond this, that whatever side of the aisle you fall on, that you could hate somebody for the fact that they have Asian heritage, or the fact that they have African American heritage, or the fact that they come from a family that they have Mexican heritage. It's just baffling to me.
Yeah.
But here's what's important in what you're saying is most people that would hear you say that would say that's not in me. But here's where I think it's prevalent. What you're describing is cloaked, usually, in a thinly veiled xenophobia.
Yeah. Fear.
They're different than me.
Fearful of what's
That's
different. Fearful that I'm not familiar with their culture. Just fear that some sort of outside race is infringing on my territory. And that if, I don't know, I just think that the whole idea of conspiracy, the whole idea of there's a lot of things coming over from the last presidency. The fact that the whole ban on Muslim countries,
China virus,
the China virus. You have, I'm talking about things that are absolutely critical when it comes to you operating as a Christian. When you look at Mexicans, and your first thought is coyotes, rapists, and murderers.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that you have a real problem with fear on your heart.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a whole contingency of people, and for some reason it exists in the church heavily, that are watching YouTube conspiracy videos and that have a real problem with anybody who looks different than them. And I think that those things, those deep veils over your heart, make it really difficult to experience the church, to experience Christ in a full way. Is that you can't lack compassion for all people and be a fully functioning Christian. Is that your compassion should. I heard a story the other day of somebody who has a Asian American, they go to school with him, and they were concerned about him after the shooting, and they were like, "Hey, are you doing okay? Like, I'm sorry. This is the thing. It's like, you know what? I'm doing okay. I wear sunglasses and a hat and scarf everywhere I go, and I look white, so I'm not too concerned."
That's crazy.
That should break your heart.
Yeah.
It should break your heart. So maybe we can do a whole other conversation on the state of our country. But I just feel like I had to say that just with the recency of everything. I always appreciate what you guys bring to the table.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can talk about more controversial things like this. Our goal is not always to change your mind, but is just to be vulnerable and honest in where we are and how we're processing things. So we would love it, as always, if you would share, if you would write us in an email, podcast@thex.church, if you would share our YouTube videos, if you'd share our Spotify show, our Apple Podcast show. We are just so thankful for our family that watches. Can't wait to see you next week.